you should be good.
This working? There we go. All right. Welcome back, everybody. I might need to turn the mic up. Colin, John, Mike, Nate, Kevin, Sam, Nick. No one can hear. We turn that up. Oh, can't turn it up? All right. Let me see who I got back there. John Ray. If you can corral people in the back. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. Nice sunny day in Deer Valley, so it's nice to have that patio out there. We are going to keep the trains running here, kicking off the next session with Kristin Berman, which I'm super excited about. I did a fair amount of YouTube stalking of Kristen before she came, so I have a sense for what we're in store for, and I'm looking forward to it. Kristen is the co-founder of Irrational Labs at Duke University, which is a behavioral economics lab. So all of that, really interesting intersection of social sciences and economics that drives consumer behavior. Super excited to tap into what's inside her brain. She's the author of Hacking Human Nature for Good, a practical guide to changing human behavior. So heaven knows we in marketing like to do that, and now hopefully we do that a little bit more benevolently than we might have in the past. And she's here to talk about human decision-making and how we can influence it in authentic ways that don't sacrifice trust. So I'm going to hand it over to Kristen. Thank you. You have more stuff than I do. I think so.
Okay, I think, there we go. Okay, wonderful, I'm very excited to be here. So we're just gonna start with a question. If you guys have ever been to a gathering with wine and cheese, it looks something like this. This is in San Francisco, so the people in San Francisco, men wear scarves and women wear striped pants. This is just how we show up to our social gatherings. But if you've ever been to a social gathering like this, what do you know? What happens at these social gatherings? People talk, and they talk with small talk. And so small talk is talking about commuting, and it's talking about your job, and it may be talking about travel or upcoming vacations, it may be talking about sports. And from the looks of it, you would see that people really love small talk, because that's all we talk about when we come together at these gatherings, at least for the first hour or so, until you maybe have had a few more drinks. And so the question is that do people just hate stimulating conversation? Do they love small talk? I'm particularly poor at small talk, so I decided to design this party such that small talk was off limits. So we had a rule, and it said no small talk. I will help define the conversation, and I passed out cards, and people could talk about things, but it couldn't be things that they could find on Facebook. And so some of the things could be like, something from your childhood or something you're looking forward to, potentially a deepest fear. But it just couldn't be things that are surface level. And what happened? Turns out people really enjoyed it. They stayed for a very long time. Sometimes I measure these parties by how many connections happened from either dating or these two actually went on to live together. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, do people really hate small talk? Which we would tell if you were to put devices on people and listen to them in these situations, you would say people love small talk. But when you change the environment, what happens? People's behavior changes, and it's not that they love small talk, it's just that they are going along with the norm. They're not taking enough risk in their conversation. Let's do another example of one of these questions. This is me hiking in Mammoth. The woman behind me is a neuroscience PhD student, exceptionally smart. And because I study financial decision making as well, I started asking people about their finances. If you hang out with me long enough, I will also ask you about your finances. Maybe your couple done or your couple or marriage life as well. But I found out that this woman behind me is not investing. And so if you look at her bank account, you probably would say, like, she must hate risk, right? Like, she's not investing. What's her problem? Maybe she's a woman, she doesn't like to invest, or maybe she doesn't have enough. That says she's not an investor. Why is that? And what we found out was that she just didn't have a reason to do it. So she never really thought about it. And so that during this hike, I said, great, well, this week I'll give you a deadline, and if you'd like, you can sign up for Betterment, and I'll call you in a week and see if you did it. And guess what? In a week, she did. So on the outward face of the world, she doesn't like investing. She doesn't want to do it, but that's not really what's going on, right, in her life. It's just she didn't have a reason to. Okay, final example here. This is, again, I live in San Francisco. This is a group house that I started. There are 10 people. We're in our 30s. We live together by choice. And so it's fascinating to see what happens here. But what I reflected on was that about a year and a half ago, I was 15 pounds lighter, or 15 pounds heavier. Not lighter. Wait, yes. So I'd lost 15 pounds in the last year and a half. And the question was why? And if you looked at me, you may say, you know, she just doesn't like to work out. She doesn't really understand healthy food. You'd probably come up with all these reasons about why maybe I couldn't or didn't want to lose weight. And the real answer to this is that I just didn't buy groceries. And so one of the benefits of living with people is that other people buy groceries. So we have Instacart, they're delivered automatically to us, and all of a sudden I have a ton of healthy vegetables and food in the house. I'm eating less and I'm eating more healthy, not because I don't want to, but because I'm a busy person and this is now just much easier. So many times, basically, we have confounded problems in our life. And marketing in itself is a confounded, marketing is a confounded problem where we're looking at people's preferences and assuming that is the behavior that represents what they actually want to do. Somebody likes something and you assume that's actually their preference. Somebody doesn't do something or doesn't like something and you assume that's their preference. And the hypothesis of behavioral science is that actually that's not true. There are forces working under, beneath, and around us that are pushing us to do these things, and it's not inherently clear from the actual expression of preferences. And so your job as a marketer or somebody who actually wants to convince people to do things or influence them is to take more of a skeptical eye and say, actually, are they doing it because they like it, or is there some underlying force here? So today we're going to talk about what motivates people to do anything, and we're going to look at a particularly interesting question of work. So what motivates people to do work, and we'll apply this to other things as well. I think I have like fast fingers here or something. And then we're going to take a break once, and you guys will get a chance to work on applying some of these principles of motivation, and then we'll take a break again, and you'll get a chance to work on some of these principles of applying motivation. So hopefully it'll be like a little bit activity. I'll be talking a little bit, you'll be working a little bit. Great? Good? Great, because you don't have a choice, so that's okay, wonderful. So one of the biggest confounding problems that we have is why do we work? And if you were to look at our system and how we're set up, you basically say we work because we're paid. We come into work because we get a paycheck, and then we leave work when the paycheck ends. And actually, many times that's how it appears. So we work with a company called Homebase. We got 40,000 small business scheduling data, and we said, when do people show up to work? And guess how many people show up early? Less than 1%. So you would assume, if you see that actually, why would you show up early? You show up when you start getting paid. And so the system basically says, there's the cheese, we're rats in a maze, continue working until you get your cheese. And that's really how we've defined it, as well as that there's managers, employees, and then the manager's job is to give you a carrot. So if you've been at Facebook, you know that they're actually very clever at this. So about every 3 months, you get some stock or equity bonuses that you can claim. And so about in the middle there, in 6 weeks, you say, I think I may leave Facebook. And the question is, do you really want to leave? Because in 6 weeks, you may get another bonus. So managers have been very clever to design this system to kind of keep the rewards going. And the question we want to ask is this a confounded problem? Do we work for other reasons? So we'll start with, okay, can we click the, yeah, there we go. This is the obvious starting place for talking about social psychology, is Seinfeld. Oh, there's no sound? We did test this. Anyone seen
Breakfast.
this clip? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so.
Leland by 9.
Oh, there. Okay.
Kramer? Hey, buddy. Hey.
It's 8 o'clock in the morning. What the hell is going on?
Breakfast. I gotta be in at Brant Leland by 9.
Why?
Because I'm working there, that's why.
How long have I been asleep? What year is it?
Look, Jerry, I don't know if you've noticed, but lately I've been drifting aimlessly.
Now that you mention it.
But I finally realized what's missing in my life. Structure. And at Brant Leland, I'm getting things done. And I love the people I'm working with.
How much are they paying?
No. I don't want any pay. I'm doing this just for me.
Clearly. So, what do you do down there all day?
TCB. You know, taking care of business. Yep, I gotta go. All right. I'll see you tonight, huh?
Forget my briefcase. Well, what do you got in there?
Crackers. White hair, no green.
Okay. If we want to and pause that, otherwise it'll just start. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So there are obviously other reasons why we work. You know, he's not getting paid and yet he's working. How many people have side projects? You have a side project in San Francisco. Everyone has side projects that they do in addition to their work. And so there are constantly other reasons of why we're working. The question is, what do we understand about why those are? So one of them, you know, the story of Tom Sawyer. So basically he's punished and has to paint this fence. And while he's painting this fence, Ben comes up to him and starts making fun of him for having to paint the fence and not being able to go swimming. And Tom Sawyer says, you know what? It's not work if it's fun. And continues to paint. And Ben now gets very curious and says, hey, can I try? And he says, I don't think so. He said, oh, maybe if you give me your apple. Right now, all of a sudden, Ben is paying to work. Right? So we've completely switched the paradigm of having to get paid by switching the framing of what work actually is. So another example, this is actually my partner Phil, who's a climber. If you're a climber, anyone a climber out there? You do very hard things that are very scary. So this one was like going up something in France that was like 12 hours, and if you want to stop midway, you don't really have a choice. I'm not clear why you would endeavor on something like this. It's very difficult. And hard, and it's hot outside, and you would expect basically when they get to the top, you're like delighted. You're like, I cannot believe that I did this. I'm so excited to have accomplished such a life feat. And this is Phil's face when he got, oh man, I'm killing this little clicker here. So this is Phil's face when he got done, right? It's terrible. He's very exhausted. Those are his feet. I'm sorry to show you. And so you'd expect basically when you're doing these things, when you're motivated to do something that's not work, that actually would be delightful. And that's not the case here, right? He's not only motivated to do something that's not work, that's very hard in life, threatening, but he's not delighted at the end. He looks back and maybe he's delighted. Maybe there's some enjoyment there, but this is what we call type 2 fun. And so what we're going to start to pick out is like, what is the essence of these things that are motivating people to do something besides what they're paid to do or incentivized to do? And then try to operationalize that into what you guys do as marketers and people who want to influence your customers and your employees. Okay, so the number one takeaway here is we're not always motivated by money. It's not that we can't be motivated by money, it's just that sometimes we're not always motivated by money in the same way that we would expect. A very nice study done by Danny Ariely in his lab was that you try basically to get people to do some work, and you're going to say, I'm not going to pay you anything to do this work, and the type of work is basically doing a repetitive task for as long as possible. You say, how long actually, how much effort do people put into this? And at zero payment, they put this much effort in. It's a relative scale, so don't worry that I don't have numbers on the left. And when you start paying them something low, not a lot of money, what happens? They do less work, right? And when you start paying them higher amounts, they do more work. This is reasonable. This is what we would expect from a study, that basically if it's, you know, maybe they just want to do this amount of labor, but when you start doing it very low, it's not worth it. My time is more valuable. Higher, it's a little bit more worth it. My time is more valuable. And so then for the study, they says, now we're not going to pay people. We're going to give people candy. So they're going to pay people what we call a social reward. It's like a thank you. So they gave people little candy bars. And this time, basically, when they did this, what happened is that the low payment was actually the same as the high payment. So when you're changing the rewards from something that's monetary to social, if you give me some candy versus a lot of candy, what happens? I'm very appreciative of the candy. It doesn't actually matter how much candy you give me. This is kind of fascinating, right? You're just saying thank you. If I say thank you 5 times, it's not necessarily any additive. We really appreciate the gift and the effort. So as a typical marketer, what would you do? You'd say, I can get double rewards for combining social and money. Right? You'd look at an Excel sheet and you would say, this is beautiful. I know how to double my returns. I'm just going to add these two together. And so what happens is when we add them both, you actually go down to what the monetary payment was. Why? Because as Kent said, basically when you add money to a transaction, we call them social and transactional markets. When you add money to the transaction, you actually regress to the transactional market. You're not getting any added benefits when you combine the two. So the question is, like, at what point should you be combining the two, and should you ever try to combine the idea of a social market, or I think Ken was saying there's communal and exchange markets, we call them social and transactional markets, in order to motivate people to do stuff. And this is one place where you definitely should not. So if you've ever brought wine to a party, and you were to tell the person, I brought you some wine, or another party you go and say, I brought you some wine and it was $30, your reaction would be quite different than just saying it's a gift versus combining a gift and money. And so that means that basically we're more motivated when things are in purely one market, as Ken was saying. And we're more motivated by something if it's in a purely social or purely transactional market. And sometimes when we try to combine these two, we get messed up. So there's a nice study by Origami who basically looked at Israel daycares. And the problem with a daycare system is that parents can be late. And in a daycare system, you have to pay the person to stay and watch the kids when the parents are late. And so as parents get more late, or there becomes a norm to get late, you actually end up losing a lot of money. And so he went and he said, I know the solution to this. I will charge parents for being late. And so we added a $15 fine to actually every parent who was late, and said every 15 minutes we will charge you $15. And what happened? It actually made them later, right? Because what is going on here is that you're saying, I now know the exact amount of time that I can be late and how much it will cost me. So we went from a guilt marketplace to a transactional one, and then people are willing to make those trade-offs. And then the crazy thing is when he took away the financial fine, what happened? You stuck at the fine behavior, where people still had equated in their heads to the cost of being late, and so they were still as late as they were when you had the fine. So once you add an actual financial incentive to something, it becomes much harder to pull it back, because you've anchored people on this as a transactional relationship. So what do we think about this? Many of the systems around, or the companies that we've worked with, larger companies, offer massive referral bonuses for employees. So referral bonuses for customers is one thing. Most of the time you offer a massive referral bonus for employees. And so one company we worked with, it was $2,000 to refer a friend. And they decided that's not enough. We're going to increase it. People aren't actually acting on it, and so we're going to increase it to $4,000. What happened? Nothing. No increase in referrals, and now they can't pull the $4,000 back, right? Because you've just told people, I'll pay you $4,000 for referring someone, and you actually then can't take that anchor away. Now we'll talk later about, and we'll come back to why that actually didn't work. Okay, another example here of social and transactional. So Google, we did an experiment. So I was at Google for 3 years, started their behavioral economics group with Danny Rielli, and we did a lot of experiments. And one of the first ones that we started working with them on was they kept offering $50 incentives to advertisers in order to do something. So sometimes it was to sign up for Adwords, and so they got their list on a name, and they would give them the incentive. And sometimes it was just to do the hardest thing in Adwords, which is ad conversion tracking. It's very difficult for a marketer to go to the developer and have them add a piece of code on their site. And so they said, let's just pay people in order to do this. And so we'll offer a $50 incentive. From the behavioral science perspective, we said that's probably not the best use of money, or at least let's try to see if it is. And we said, let's move the world into a social world, where we said, instead of offering you $50, we're going to tell you to go watch a movie. We're going to tell you as a marketer, you say, you have been working so hard, here's a movie to Google Play. And so what we're playing on basically is, are people really motivated by $50, probably that they're going to be using to help their job and make their lives easier? Or are they potentially more motivated in the social world that says Google's just giving you a gift for doing something? And we got a 100% increase in the response rate for Google Play. We also tested a different version of just one movie. I think we picked the wrong movie, so that had a little bit less of an impact. So you can imagine we were just going to send them the movie by mail versus give them this $20. We were thinking that that one would win. I think because picking one movie doesn't solve for everybody, it didn't. But it's interesting thought to say, like, actually, can you just start figuring out what's going to motivate people from the social perspective instead of the monetary perspective? Okay, so we've kind of set baseline here is that, and this is not what works, this is just what doesn't work. Or what maybe you should second guess yourself is a confounded problem, is not that people are always motivated by money, and we have a problem in our world, as we talk about paid advertising and referral marketing, of when we combine them, what actually happens may not always be good. Even though that would see from, if you're looking at an Excel sheet, that would give you dividends. Okay, so now we're going to go into the fun stuff, which is 3 things that we can do in order to kind of tap into some of this intrinsic motivation that people just have. Actually, before we do that, sorry, we're going to write down a couple places where you use money to motivate your potential users, your users, or if you can't think of that, your employees. So take a couple minutes and write these things down, and then we'll kind of shout them out to get a feel for where you are with using monetary incentives. By the way, monetary incentives, again, it's free, it's discounts, it's rewards, and these are never all bad. So I'm not proposing that you should take these away. I'm proposing we should look at them with that marketing is a confounded problem and look at them with more of a magnifying glass. When you all start looking at me uncomfortably is when I'll move on. Getting like all this table staring uncomfortably, so that's great. Anyone want to volunteer and just raise your hand with what places you have monetary incentives, rewards, discounts, free things that you're giving to motivate behavior? Membership. Say a little bit more.
Membership, and we have an organization, so it's a benefit as a member to receive these discounts through Experticity as well as other manufacturers.
Nice. Mail-in rebates. Okay. And by the way, I do want to clarify, these are things we're going to examine with a fine tooth, not that we're recommending to completely take away, because everything is context dependent in the behavior research world. So in no world can you say one thing works for everything. So this is an exercise in examining if you could spend less and get more. Okay, so rebates, membership, volume discounts. What does that look like for you? Nice. Yep.
We incentivize our tech reps in the field to collect data often, and they, in exchange, get Amex gift cards for certain specials.
Nice. Can you remind me to talk about a regret lottery if we don't get there today? Okay, I won't derail us now, but this could be interesting.
Gift cards for credit card sign up, and then $1 off for ship to store option.
Nice. $1 off for ship to store option. Got it.
We do email submission, a discount for people signing up for our newsletters.
Okay. Okay. Nice. I have another tick there, but I'll look at both of you and try to channel that later. Cool.
We do race entries for volunteers for our users.
What'd you say?
Race entries.
Race entries.
For volunteers.
Okay.
Yeah, so if they volunteer
Nice.
9 times in a year, they get a free entry.
Nice. This is an interesting thing because I wouldn't actually classify that as monetary so much as a thing. So when we think about some incentives, we think about monetary things like candy or race entry, and then social, which could be a compliment or getting a beer with a manager, or some kind of a friend discount, or status as a VIP. So we kind of break those out, and so I think actually you're more in this interesting thing category. Okay, so we have a fair amount. Now you're going to hold on to these, and then we're going to use them as fuel to assess whether we can add any of these principles to modify, change, enhance, or get rid of the monetary incentive. Okay, so our question is what will motivate people, what could motivate people, what does motivate people more than work or more than money? And where we're going to start is origami, obviously. And so the Duke Lab also did a nice study around origami. And so each person, which is called a builder, I'm going to hold this in my left hand so that I don't reveal the study. So each person got a sheet, and they were said, you're asked to basically build this origami. Origami itself is not terribly complex if the directions are good. So all origami depends on how good the directions are. And so people would build this origami, they were called builders, and then they would give it and show it to another person, they were called evaluators. And both people were asked how much do they like and value this origami. So how much value are they placing on the origami? This was all done in monetary as well as some survey questions. And then it was created as an index and said, do builders, people who made it, like it more, or do the evaluators like it more? What do we expect? Any guesses? Yes. So builders like it more than the evaluators. Again, this is a relative scale. We do use numbers at Duke, but this is for points of presentation. And so what happened actually after that is more interesting, where we said, let's make the directions more difficult. So what happens when you make the directions more difficult? Origami becomes unrecognizable. So people really struggle. The time they take to create it is longer. And the origami itself is typically less recognizable or classified as origami, maybe just a paper fold. And so the whole exercise was repeated, and you said, hey, builder, how much do you like it? And then they asked the evaluator and said, how much do you like it? And so what do we think happened? So in this case, we'd expect basically the origami is not as good, and potentially the builder should recognize this. Potentially the builder should say, I've built origami before, and I understand what is good origami, and this is probably not as good as origami as my previous creation. And the evaluator maybe could have that same hypothesis. What actually happened was that the builders liked it even more than they did when they built their easy creation, and the evaluators liked it even less. And why do we think this is? Because this concept of effort. So if I'm going to put more effort into something, I've spent more time on it, I've thought about it, I value my own work a lot, and so I'm potentially going to value my creation more because I've put more time and effort into something. By the way, the clincher to this is that when we call it intuition studies and we say, hey, builder, how much do you think the evaluator will like your stuff? And they think the evaluator will like their stuff even more than the easy piece. So they have no intuition that this is not good origami. They're really basing it on their effort level here. So a few reflections here. If you ever have parents who have kids, potentially they may like their kids more because they put a lot of effort into them. You may not. It's very rarely go on the playground and say that child is somebody that it looks better than mine or somebody that I'd like to just go and play with. Typically, we value our own children much more than others. And then the other very salient thing that happened to me last week, I do some brainstorms, and sometimes they invite a lot of people in, and then we get to like put dots. Have you ever done dot voting, where you like have a brainstorm and you put dots on it? And I stopped everybody after we had the vote, and I was like, okay, can everybody reveal what their own idea was? And so what happened is that of the dots, 2 of the 3 were from your own idea. So when we put effort into something, even our ideas, we like them more. And the two people in the group who had 3 of 3 were McKinsey consultants. So be careful of that. This also could be why Phil really liked his journey up the mountain, right? He's putting a lot of effort into something. He himself has now traveled up this large mountain. He reflects and says, I cannot believe how great that was. I put so much effort into it. This effect also holds with building furniture. So Mike Norton at Harvard did some nice research on the IKEA effect, where it says, you know, in some worlds, we basically shouldn't like IKEA furniture as much as we do. It's not as high quality, it falls apart, it's difficult to build, and yet people who build the furniture like it more than people who are observing people build the furniture. So same kind of concept, where you're actually putting effort into something and you value it more. So this is going to be our first reflection, our first concept, and the question would be is how do you get your potential users or your users to put more effort, which is very counterintuitive to how we typically design conversion flows, into your product. And so I'm not talking about just adding friction for friction's sake. I'm talking more about the endowment and having people really do something, and so that they feel that they actually put an effort to create something. Okay, second one, we're going to start with Legos. And so this is another lab experiment where we pay people to do things, and this time it's paying people to build Legos. And so they get paid a lot, not a lot, but relatively for lab experiments and lab budgets a lot, so you pay people $3. And you say after the $3 payment, you say you can just stop. You can stop whenever you want to, or if you want to, you can continue and build another Lego and we'll pay you a little bit less. So the question is then, how many Legos do people build, and when do they stop, and what is what we call a reservation wage, which is how much you'd actually have to get paid in order to continue building. And so it keeps going, keeps going. The key to this is to press hard, like Diana said. Thank you. Keeps going. And the clincher was that some groups actually got 2 different conditions here. In one group, it was called the meaningful condition, and after you built your Legos, the researchers would come in and bring you another pail of Legos, and you would have your nice creation right to your right, and you would continue building, and then when you were done, the researcher would say, do you want to continue building? I'll pay you this much, and then you would move the creation that you just did to the side. In the other condition, what happened is that you would build, you'd get $3, and then they would dismantle the Legos in front of you and then ask you to build the same thing from the Legos that you just spent time creating. This is called the futile condition, which is basically like rolling a rock up a hill, and right before you get to the top, it has to fall down, and you just keep doing this over and over and over again. So the comparison here could be to things like asking an employee or something to do work, and then potentially they never get to present it, the project is canceled, something happens. The question is, how do those people feel? They don't feel that good about the work, even though it's the same content of work, there's the same types of Legos, and they potentially wouldn't feel as good. Okay, see, I have clicker hands here. So as expected, in the meaningful condition, people built 11 more Legos, and in the futile condition, they had 7. In the world of research, this is actually a very large effect to get people to have that high of a difference when you just change one thing, which is if they're building it from new Legos or previously deconstructed Legos. But then again, we do something called an intuition study, where we ask people, how much do you think people will continue building or not continue building? And we find a much, much smaller non-statistically significant effect, where actually in the meaningful condition, it's only 8 to 7. And people don't realize this effect of what giving people meaning, any reason to do something, actually contributes to our level of engagement and level of effort and value that we put on this task. The other question was, in a world, you basically say, in a normal world, you say, if you love something more, if somebody came in, we call this again like a controlling factor, if somebody came in and said, I really love Legos, you'd expect that they would build more Legos, so we have to control for something like that, and that's actually not what happened. In the futile condition, the love of Legos did not predict how many they built. In the meaningful condition, it predicted how much they built. So basically what this says is we can do only a very small thing to take away someone's inherent love of something by a very small change that makes them love it less and not actually continue and want to carry on. Okay, so now you're asking yourselves, this is great. Do I get my customers to build Legos? What does this actually mean? And I think the thought exercises here is how do you create meaning from anything that you do with an engagement of a client, a customer, or your employees? And so we did another experiment at Google where we basically said, how do we increase retention for AdWords? So how many of you have tried AdWords? It's a very difficult product. People who work on AdWords know this, they say it. And so what happens with difficult products is you actually need to get over the hump to figure out that it works. And so that means you have to invest some effort and to figure out that it actually will provide you dividends and returns. And so you have a problem when people first sign up for products like this, and that if they aren't willing to put in the effort or they don't know, they drop off. And so right away, people are dropping off of these complex products. And so we talked about this and said, wow, how would we get people to stay on this product? And we considered different things. And one of the things we landed on was how do we create more meaning into what their first experience looks like? How do we make it more than just a one and done kind of attempt? And so we created basically a 3-month AdWords expert program where people come in, the call rep says hello, and then instead of saying, how can I help you with AdWords, they say, welcome to the 3-month AdWords expert program. You get access to me, I'm an expert, and I will help you for the period of 3 months. Let's get started, this is a journey. So instead of just doing one thing like adding conversion tracking and thinking maybe it'll work out, we basically created a bubble and said it actually means more than this. It's part of your whole onboarding strategy. So the first thing that happened was fascinating. When we visited the call center, the AdWords reps loved it. They loved being called experts. So it's actually, this again is a confounded study, is maybe they just love being called experts. And it may have had a halo effect of the whole program because they just did a better job when they were called experts. But again, this is actually goes along this meaning track, right, of that actually putting more meaning in will increase our outcomes. And lo and behold, again, sometimes we don't tell stories unless they have a positive effect, and thus this one increased retention by 14% when we put some meaning around it. The meaning inherent also to this was more of a longer-term mindset. And so I think that kind of another effect of this is basically many times people go into products and say, I will just try it and see if it works, versus having a longer-term outlook on the world and saying, actually, I'm in it, and I could have some up and downs, just like a relationship. If you meet somebody for the first time and it's a bad date, it's an off day, then you're saying it's one date, I'm out, versus if you say I'm gonna have 3 dates with them, you say, let me actually think about what the holistic relationship looks like. Okay, another example of meaning and basically how this can motivate us to do something differently. The call center, Adam Grant at Wharton did a nice study with call center reps. And the question for call center reps is how actually do you motivate them to sell when in fact their job is extremely repetitive? So many times it's extremely repetitive and high in rejection. So we don't many times put ourselves in a rejection place as many times as call center reps do. Not only do people say no, they hang up, they get upset. And so we said, Adam said, how do you actually increase the motivation of this call center rep? And he only changed one thing. So by the way, the call center was calling out for alumni donations. And so those alumni donations would then go to a scholarship for incoming students. And so we just changed one thing and said, basically, let's actually have a voice recording and a video of a scholarship student that the call center rep actually listens to before. And this condition, they actually just read something that said, this is what you're doing, which is normal. It says, you know what? You're going to call these people. It's going to go to a scholarship. This is what the benefit's going to be. And this was extremely visceral and strong, right? Where he said, this is actually why you should get up in the morning. This person is why you get up in the morning, not because you want to hit your call center reps or because you want to do good at your job. It's this person. And 2x more time on the phone, which again could be a backfire for some of the metrics, but the money raised increased per call center rep that was given this condition. Usually those things kind of balance out. You have more time on the phone and you're making more money. So the summary of this one is that we have effort and we have adding meaning to any kind of an action. So if we're just asking people to do something for no reason, the question we'd ask ourselves is how motivating can that be? How much can you add meaning to a task to get somebody to not only first time engage, but also continue to engage. Okay. Last one, and then we'll get to work. So another Duke experiment, and basically this one had people sit down and they said, take this piece of paper, we'll give you a task, write your name on it, and then turn it into the experimenter or to the researcher. And when they turned it into the researcher said, got it, okay. And then for the next condition, this person, sorry, they did not write their name on the paper, and when they turned it into the researcher ignored it and set it down. So said nothing. And in this condition, they turned it into the researcher, and the researcher shred it before their eyes, right? And so the task that everyone was asked to do is basically make words from this. So they gave them a random set of words, and then they were asked to like put some letters together and figure out how many words they could make. And again, just like the Legos condition, you ask people, we'll pay you this much. How much do you want to make another one? We'll pay you this much. Do you want to make another one? And you continue on until you get somebody's reservation wage. Are we following? 3 conditions. 1 is acknowledged, 1 is ignored, and 1 is shredded. In all cases, they have to do kind of a task, and they get paid to this task, but in decreasing amounts. And so no surprise here, what happened in the shredded condition is that people had to be paid more in order to do work. So they had to pay $28 versus $14 in the acknowledged condition. Now this by itself is actually surprising because you imagine in a shredded condition people could cheat. Like you don't actually have to do that much work because they're shredding it. It was a fake shredder. That's how the academics work. Is that you shred it and then you look at it to see what people actually did. But most of the people here actually followed directions and actually did the work, but they didn't have to, and they still needed to pay more to continue to work. In the acknowledged condition, they had to be paid less to do the same work, and the question is, what happens in the ignored condition? It acted almost as bad as the shredded condition. Right? Fascinating. That just by saying uh-huh or I got it actually motivates people, but when you take away any kind of acknowledgement of your work, it's actually fairly demotivating. Again, obvious if you think about the work world and anyone, if you were to make a presentation, everyone would just walk out of the room and not say good job. It's like, this is trying to set up, I'll walk out of the room and he goes, good job. That actually something like acknowledging people for their effort or acknowledging them for any kind of input can be extremely motivating. So another example of kind of this acknowledging principle, in Boston, actually Mike Norton from Harvard again, he did a nice study with potholes where working with Code for America, they built a site that basically tracked all of the potholes in Boston. And the problem, does anyone live in Boston here? Yeah. Have you heard of this? Okay. So the problem with government, and we'll take a step back, the problem with government is that you actually don't see the amount of effort that government puts in. So when do trash collectors come? They come, not when you're sleeping. A lot of the work that government does is just in the background. And so many times you can imagine that you are paying tax dollars and you're not really getting any kind of a feedback of where your money's going. This is the essence of which Mike Norton and Ryan Bell did this study where they said, what if we told people the amount of effort that was going on in these kinds of systems, potentially they could appreciate government more. And so they did this, this was their modification. It used to be a blank map, and then people could come in and tag the potholes. So you could actually come in and say, I want this pothole fixed. And the modification they made to this app that they actually created with Code for America was that you could add this and you would see what the work that the government has already done. And so it's really just kind of showing a feedback loop of these are the types of things that we're doing to right now that could increase your happiness. And what happened is that the detailed feedback increases the affinity of the government, so how much you like the government, and the trust within the government. These types of results have been replicated in Pakistan for voting, where they check on voting records, and actually people are sharing how much the government is working to make sure that the voting is correct. Where in typical situations, it's a black hole. So you say, the government is likely helping me, I have no idea, and so maybe I'll assume that they're helping me less than they are. So acknowledging actually any kind of effort that you're putting in tends to be good, not only from the consumer perspective, but also from the government perspective. or from the entity perspective. Okay, last one on this. This is our house Slack. So as I mentioned, I live in a group house. There's 11 of us. We communicate on Slack. And so we actually created a self-congratulatory channel that because sometimes if I'm taking out the trash or I'm organizing something, no one sees it. It's effort that goes unnoticed. And when no one sees the effort, what do I feel? I feel terrible, and I'm not going to continue to do the effort. I feel unappreciated. We said there's no system in the world that could always catch. We actually do have a camera above our dishwasher to catch people who leave dishes, but there's no system in the world that could catch other things, like all the things that people do. And so we created this Slack where I'm going to actually post when I did something. So I ordered food. I called our landlord. We made a document, and people are actually just posting this. So if you can't actually acknowledge things, perhaps other people, your customers, your potential customers, can actually acknowledge the things that they're doing for themselves. This has decreased a lot of kind of underlying passive aggressiveness of I'm doing more for the house. By the way, when you add these things up, and you can do this in a marriage, you say how much effort are you putting into the marriage to do the chores and the tasks around it, it always adds up to more than 100%. Everybody thinks they're doing more effort, and the essence of kind of this resentment is fairness. And so for this is basically kind of increasing our fairness by adding an acknowledgement to it. Okay, so the hard things is the effort. The things that we're going to focus on right now are basically moving from an extrinsic world, which is things around kind of giving money and bonuses and incentives, to more of an intrinsic world, which is more around the intrinsic definition by some is mastery, autonomy, and purpose, but for us, we're going to actually take those down to tactical principles that you can do within your incentive systems or even employees. So I'd actually urge you to think broadly and holistically about motivating either salespeople or your potential customers. And the tasks we're going to do, so basically, we're going to pick the behavior you want to incentive. We've already done this. So you've already picked a behavior that is kind of ripe. Now I want you to think about the behavior that you're actually looking at. So before someone said free shipping, so actually you want people to buy a certain amount. So it's not that you actually care about giving them free shipping. You care about having them hit a certain quantity of sale, or you care about having them do a certain behavior. So you're going to take whatever money is incentivizing and bring that down to the behavior level. By the way, from the first work we do with all teams is what behavior are you trying to incentivize, so that we can actually get to the core of it versus starting with other extraneous factors. This tends to be the most difficult work because we have to narrow down the most important behavior, and you tend to get a lot of infighting within companies. So worth actually saying, this is my hypothesis of a behavior, and then taking it back to your team and saying, is that actually the behavior we want to incentivize, or are we missing something? And then you're going to choose your incentive. And so, we're confounding this idea of endowment, effort, and hard things, but I want us to think about basically the things that a person could put effort into. So the essence of this is I'm putting effort into it, and so thus I feel more ownership and value from it. Meaning and acknowledgement. And then we're going to design it. And by design it, I mean actually just say what actually would change from from the monetary incentive. And I'd like to challenge us even further to say design it as an experiment. So behavioral science is there's two things to it. One is understanding the heuristics and biases that drive us, and the second is saying we don't trust our intuition, we need to experiment. So I think the key things with adding any kind of program, experience, product, incentive is that once a company does that, you can't roll it back easily. You're stuck. So either it's a product and it's in your code base, or it's this $2,000 to $4,000 incentive, or you've just rolled something out to your best customers and they don't want to give it back even though you figured out something else could work better. And so I want us to think more in the terms of an experiment, to say only some customers get this and some customers don't. And we're going to figure out which ones work, and we're going to pick a metric actually of success to figure out which ones work. How many people experiment? Do any kind of A/B testing? Cool, great. So an experiment is a little bit different than a pilot. So a pilot is when you kind of slow roll something out, but what you're comparing a pilot to is just maybe what's worked previously, and you're not actually testing the essence of what's different about the programs that you're pushing out. And so it becomes more difficult to craft an experiment, more work from the company to do, but has a longer term benefit, right? So you basically say, if the company that was doing the 2,000 to 4,000 had tested that, they actually would have saved a lot of money. Sure, it would have cost somebody, 4 weeks to design the experiment and actually launch it, but in the long run, they're saving, millions of dollars. So that's my experiment rant. We have documents online about how to do experiments if this is so interesting for you guys. But right now, I think we'll spend 10 minutes, and you'll break out and write down basically the behavior. So on the piece of paper, you're going to write down the behavior that you're trying to get people to do, a little context on it, and then pick your incentive. So either kind of adding effort, meaning, or acknowledgement. If you're struggling with saying, wow, I can't force fit those in, I would push yourself, say, try harder. We're not used to thinking in this way. We're really used to kind of pushing monetary incentives. And again, sometimes that's great, but sometimes we can actually, if we take a magnifying glass, add something. And then the second thing is, if you still can't do it, pick a different behavior. So just try to do the exercise by applying these principles. Yeah? Again, we're doing this, so it's like a forced choice of do you want to or not, so. Can I go until 12:20?
Check.
I want to do these other slides. I think people would enjoy them, but we won't add the exercise after. Yeah. Okay.
You might count, but 5 minutes is
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Cool. I feel like I'm yelling up there. Is that correct?
I think it sounds good.
Okay.
The only thing I'd say about the clicker, I noticed you were pointing backwards. I'm wondering if it forwards might be the thing.
Such an intuition, right?
Can I switch out?
Yeah. What's going on? Am I too loud?
No.
Okay.
You don't need to worry about it.
Okay.
We're just,
You're right. What an intuition that I'm like, I need to point at the thing that I'm doing versus like the, yeah. No, I think you're totally right.
sorry about this.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, that'd be great.
By the way, fascinating discussion.
Thank you.
One of the things I love about my job is that I get to learn about stuff that I have nothing to do with.
Thank you. The experiment didn't work out. So I haven't talked about the Google stuff. The Google stuff I haven't talked about publicly. It's only been written about, so that's kind of nice. But actually, I will mention the Growbot. So the company we worked with is called Growbot, which is a gives you props on Slack, and so it's something where like if you do something, you can get acknowledged for it. And they did something interesting where they sent cream puffs to their top users. And then like a very strong way of acknowledgement. And so we didn't test it, but it's a very nice thing that those guys then were more engaged after, kind of this act of reciprocity. Yeah, I know. I think the weirdness of it actually kind of caused this. Yeah. But the experiment we did, which was more around giving people incentives, money versus experiences. So we give them either free Uber rides, probably not the right time, free Uber rides or money. We didn't have enough sample size between people who ended up taking our survey, so we couldn't, yeah. We debated a lot on quality of,
You guys have a ton of content anyway, so you got enough to work with. Cool. Yeah, so you were wrapping up around 30 minutes, or you were segueing, so we're about, 45 minutes.
Okay,
So.
cool.
Are you going to stay for lunch?
I think so. I'm trying to think. My flight. I'm actually my phone just died, so I'm not sure. I think my flight's at 4:30. Oh yeah, that'd be great. the best ideas come out in the last 2 minutes. Yeah. Yes.
This little exercise, which is choose your incentive. Are they three mutually exclusive, or could it be a combination?
One.
Just one. Can you change these?
Huh? No. No? It just, if you do more than one incentive, then you're not, I guess I'm, huh? I think it means you haven't clarified your behavior well enough. Because if you clarify the key behavior that you want people to do, the incentive should match that. And typically you don't have 3 different incentives that would match that one behavior as well. Okay, I'll just go up there. Hello. Hello. Hey, yeah, there we go. Wonderful. Okay. We're gonna spend some time if people want to volunteer to share, and then I'll give some kind of questions or dig in for more information. So when you share, start with the behavior that you want to focus on, and I'll push you if the behavior maybe is less of a behavior that we in the behavior science field would go. So expect some questions there, and then what incentive category you're trying to design for, and then what you came up with. Who are the brave souls to go first? We'll wildly applaud and give you acknowledgement. Okay.
So, we are a sports nutrition company. We're fairly small. We try to actually interact a lot with our customers with lifestyle products. So, building retention is really important. We currently have a lot of first-time buyers, and they don't always buy a second time. So, we've actually tried, are starting to try this experiment and realizing that we can actually turn into a real experiment. We've been hand-writing letters to first-time buyers, acknowledging them for trying the product or supporting the brand, and encouraging them to give us feedback. I've personally, as the CEO, written about 70 handwritten letters.
Nice.
And have had 11 of them email me back, and most of them fairly positive responses, and in some way saying customer for life or something in that vernacular. But we also use a CRM tool where we could actually measure this over a much longer term, like retention.
That's
and
great.
See how these customers actually, how long they actually stay with us.
Nice. A question for you is, what other acknowledgement could you give? So I was just telling Dana, we work with a company that is add-on to Slack, and they do props. And so I can basically say, hey, props Wendy for doing good. And then as a manager, you can incentivize Wendy because she did good. And the cool thing that this company did is for people who are not participating a lot, and then also for people who are lower performers and higher performers, they sent cream puffs to them. It's kind of a thank you for just being on the platform. So it'd be interesting, one, to say is, could you send something weird instead of a handwritten note that would be a little bit like, whoa, I can't believe they just sent me cream puffs. I'm not particularly recommending cream puffs, but it's interesting. And then the second thing would be is many times we want to incentivize our highest performing, and I like what you guys are doing is incentivizing the first time people who you don't know. But many times we have an intuition to incentivize that people are really good users or really good employees or really good, and that's great. And then the question is, what do we do with these people who aren't performing? Do we actually, because those guys are maybe the people who actually could have a higher incremental jump from a very small action. Now obviously it's a cost-benefit analysis because these guys who are delivering a lot and doing great are probably going to get you more dividends. But we can also think about the people who are low performing. In fact, did an experiment at Hilton where you give bonuses to either high performing people or low performing people or random. And so what happened is that randomly distributing bonuses was the most effective way to give bonuses. Because you basically are catching some people who could leapfrog, but typically kind of our intuition is to always and only do the top. Okay, thank you, that was wonderful. Another person wants to do a behavior? You guys just sat in silence the whole time, okay.
I'll speak on behalf of the New York Roadrunners. New York Roadrunners. Her idea again. This concept of volunteers supporting the race. So she had shared earlier that a volunteer would volunteer 9 times servicing their Saturdays on races to get a $350 race ticket entry to the New York Marathon. And so she had shared that, and we might have all had these experiences with Ragnars or Spartan races or other fun events where you have volunteers. Some are on this spectrum where they're sitting there and, quote, I don't really want to talk to people. That was one extreme. And then all the way to your very excited people to engage. So the behavior that we identified was to engage with the racers positively and with great energy and passion. And the recognition we identified was really acknowledgement. And then we kind of explored a few ways to acknowledge those folks. We talked about social media or some other, they're already doing T-shirts and some other endowments. But we didn't really get to the experiment. We talked about racer surveys and things like that.
Cool. Another one for you guys could be adding meaning. So basically picking a group of volunteers and just sending them I sometimes race, and I am so grateful to the volunteers. So you could imagine actually this visceral appreciation, even after the race where a runner's really tired, is I cannot believe that at mile 5, this person came and talked to me, and I'm so grateful. And really kind of thinking about how you would add the meaning for this because they inherently know it, and that's why they're there. And I wonder how much that could kind of, even if you randomly did it to a group of volunteers, of how much that would get them to come back to the next one. Okay, one or a couple more maybe? From the back, the people who are slyly in the back. There we go.
Hi, I'm Brittany. I work for Sport Dog brand. So we make training products, electronic training products for hunting dogs. And I'm not really sure if I'm doing this the right way, so I may need your help.
But we'll still clap and acknowledge you, so we're good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the thing that I said is that we have free shipping on orders on our website past a certain dollar amount. So really the behavior would be that we want to get people to spend that certain dollar amount on our website to boost our online sales. We don't really do any other discounts or rebates or anything on our products, so this is really one of the only ways that we have to sort of boost our online sales. And then I said that the incentive that we could do instead would be maybe to make a donation on their behalf to a conservation organization. So we work a lot with Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever, Rough Grouse Society, and different hunting organizations that we partner with. But I didn't know if, we're obviously still spending money to make that donation in their name, but it kind of I was sort of thinking about, Tom's, how they donate a pair of shoes for every pair that you buy. So I think that sort of cause marketing may incentivize people a little bit more than just getting free shipping. So again, not really sure if that's correct.
I think that's great. And one thing that you're doing there is just still giving people an anchor. So you say like how much is an amount to buy, and you're giving them an anchor to reach. And you could also imagine, I don't know how smart you can get, but looking in their cart and saying, the things that you buy, we're going to actually amplify and donate to a relevant cause, so that you kind of are keeping it all in the family, right? You're saying this is the types of things you're interested in, and assess that, and then maybe you only have a 2 or 3, but you would say we've chosen this based on what you get, and if you just get to a little bit more, we'll be able to make the donation on your behalf.
Awesome. Yeah. And then the experiment, we could do like a split test. So one would be just to still offer the free shipping versus the donation and see which one worked better.
Great. And then one would just be to give people an anchor, where you're spending no money and you're saying,
Nothing.
Somebody who really cares about this is, spending this amount on the site, or like has these types of products which add up to these things.
Awesome.
Cool. Great.
Thank you.
How are we on time? 10 more minutes? Okay. 15 minutes. Okay, so one more, if you will. Yes, woo! Sorry, let's clap for everyone before. I'm making false promises. And this guy.
What's up, everybody? My name is Kyle Nishi. I work for Vista Outdoor. I'm actually going to give you an example that was from my previous job. So I worked for Ford Motor Company, and the behavior that we were trying to generate was buzz around the Ford Fiesta when it came out, I think in like 2011. So the interesting thing is, if you think about the Ford Fiesta, it's a very unique car. It's teeny. So we really wanted to go after millennials. So for us to do that, the behavior was to drive a huge social media buzz around the campaign through a program called Give Me the Gig. And everyone loves music. Millennials love music. So what we did is we asked bands from across the nation to come up and create, basically send us their sound bits or their music, and then have them share on this platform we created. And whoever generated the most kind of buzz, interactions, likes, comments, would actually then be invited to this premiere in Las Vegas. And if they won, the band would actually win a recording session with Don Was. He's this legendary producer, produced Rolling Stones, that kind of stuff. And it was crazy. The results we saw were just phenomenal, because you're getting bands to talk about your brand and saying how much Ford is awesome, and they're supporting them, and they get this great opportunity. But then on top of that, you're getting the band's fans to back Ford and back it, saying this is such a great program. So it was, the reception that we received was just phenomenal. And it's all you're really doing out of that is acknowledging these grassroots bands that really want to make it big, but it's so hard in the music industry. And having an opportunity like that was phenomenal. So it was awesome. It was probably one of the most rewarding experiences that I had. So cool.
That's great. Thank you.
Yep.
One thing we've learned about some of these leaderboard things, and I don't think this applies to you guys, but interesting nonetheless, is leaderboards are great if we want to incentivize the top. So think about Strava. If you're somebody who doesn't work out, very difficult to feel incentivized in Strava, because you're incentivizing the top of a group. And so when we want to think about how much do leaderboards work, you want to basically say how much do you care about just the top? And if you don't care about the bottom, that's okay, then we should do the leaderboard. Or you can think about a way to incentivize people within the leaderboard with like little chunks, right? To say if you've hit this milestone, then you've kind of achieved something. But typically comparing, so there's a concept of goal gradient where we really care about progress. And so if you're starting at 0, it's less motivating to get to 100 than if you're starting at something like 75. And so when you have a leaderboard and you're always going to be at 0, it's less motivating to get to 100. So it's just kind of a thought exercise with leaderboards, is how much do the people at the bottom feel progress, and can you manifest or make up that progress so they're feeling like they're making more progress, even if they're maybe potentially at the bottom. Okay, we're going to do a few more kind of concepts, and then you guys will go to lunch, but I want to kind of sneak these in. So I want to talk about ongoing versus one-time behaviors, because they act differently in the world of incentives. So here is there's a Group Ideas 42 did a nice experiment where they wanted to encourage savings deposits. So people who already had savings accounts were encouraged to continue to deposit. And so they did these 3 conditions: a basic savings account, a high interest savings account, and then a basic account combined with self-help group meetings and then a high interest rate account. So basically kind of separating the two and saying we're just going to add this peer group on. And what happened here is that the self-help group basically added on 3.5 more deposits. So when we have something like an ongoing behavior and you're comparing it to solely financial incentives, financial incentives have not really been proven in kind of multiple domains, from health and finances to drive ongoing behavior. And a lot of that's because when you take the financial incentive away, the motivation is not there. So we're not pulling at someone's intrinsic motivation. This middle one, using peer groups, was very helpful, and it did. They then replaced it with reminders to save. So self-help groups are actually very expensive, very hard to operationalize and scale. And so they replaced it with these reminders to save and telling people how much other people are saving. And it got 80% of the session. So still beating out the monetary rewards for ongoing behavior. So again, I kind of want us to think about when you have something that's ongoing and you're in the future going to take away a monetary incentive, we should really look to non-monetary incentives as a potential confounding factor. So again, not saying monetary incentives are always bad, but we want to really look with a skeptical eye of saying, are they the only way to incentivize behavior? On the flip, if you have a one-time behavior and they're never going to do it again, potentially you want to consider monetary rewards. And so a classic one is getting people to switch bank accounts, or if you're net spend, getting them to open up, this wasn't net spend, this was Serve. Getting people to open up a new savings account. And so for this one, they did a nice experiment with a fair amount of unbanked folks. And if you're trying to open this up, if you've ever had a prepaid card and want to open a savings wallet up, which people at the prepaid card segment brags that they have savings wallet, it's actually very difficult. So you have to go through a lot of steps in order to open this up. And if you use it incorrectly, you're charged. And so there's a lot of skepticism around this. But inherently, if you're unbanked, this is a wallet for you to save your money. And what happened is that they tried a variety of different things, focusing on how automatic it was, future self, and the one that won was the incentive. And the researchers theorized, and we do too, that basically when you have one big behavior that takes a lot of effort and you're not going to get people to do it again, putting a monetary incentive out there can be the carrot that could motivate behavior. And so other banks have kind of found this as well, that you can offer people money or monetary rewards in order to switch. The question is ongoing usage. So then you want to say, now that they have a savings account, now you want to switch to non-monetary incentives in order to motivate behavior. I think when we do the monetary incentives, even with this kind of big motivation, you always want to ask yourself, can I do better? And so on the flip, Green Dot, which is at Walmart, has now started doing prize-linked savings. And so Green Dot had the same problem. They couldn't get people to actually save within the prepaid card. And so they introduced something called prize-linked savings, which is basically a lottery. So every time you save, you get entered into a lottery in order to win. And what happened here is that they increased the amount of people saving by 130% and the amount of deposits by 38%. So they trickily basically combined a monetary incentive with some ongoing incentives and use this concept we call supersize, which is very, very small. Rewards can be supersized if you do add something like a lottery. So it doesn't feel like a tit for tat anymore, which is what monetary incentives are. That's the transactional nature of if you actually do something, you get paid for it. Lotteries tend to have a different feel. We're saying, I'm going to do it and I may get a chance to win something. So the concept of just every time you're doing a monetary incentive, you want to say, can I do better in this? Supersize, Green Dot. Okay, and then the final thing I want to talk about is something of free, and then you guys will go to lunch. But we want to basically think about addressing the key barriers versus adding on an incentive as well. So right now, this whole time, we've been talking about non-monetary versus monetary incentives, and we haven't talked about sometimes like why wouldn't people do this by themselves? Like what actually is getting in their way? And if we think about where we started the conversation of like having a party or not investing, those things actually wouldn't have really helped with an incentive. There were other barriers to action that were getting in people's way of actually enacting their true preferences. And that's kind of a thought exercise that we ask all product managers or marketing folks to go through before we even think about adding any monetary or non-monetary incentive, is like, let's just do an actual key behavioral, we call it behavioral diagnosis, where we go through the whole experience a customer would have and then assess like what are the things getting in their way, and if we need to, we'll add additional benefits. Okay, so this is, these are government programs, and I want you to think to yourself, what % of eligible participants are going to be claiming these benefits? And so we have TAMP, we have SNAP, we have supplemental Social Security income, and we have EITC. So this is free money the government is giving away. It's, you qualify and you can submit forms and you can actually achieve and get this money for free. So what percentages? Think in your mind. We should be saying 100%. This is, again, free money that the government is giving away. And for the majority of this is under half of eligible people are actually claiming their benefits. Crazy, right? We're giving away free money. It's free. There are no things that, like, this is free money. Why wouldn't people do this? And so the question we should ask, there are other barriers underlying the idea of applying for SNAP or applying for EITC that would actually prevent somebody from doing something, and throwing anything at them may not be the core incentive. So for SNAP, these are the stats. It takes a really long time to apply. So people have to go there. They spend time. They have to take off work. They have to take off work if they have work, and if they don't take off work, they're actually, they reported that they missed work and incurred dependent care expenses. So this is a non-trivial cost, or a barrier is friction. And so experimenters actually did this where they said, let's take all the potential barriers of signing up for EITC, which is, I don't know what it's called in Utah, but signing up basically for food stamps, and say, we're just going to message people with very different messages. And in one, they just took the baseline, and the baseline is the green, which is the researchers called it complex notice, but really it was the control of what the state was already sending out. And they said, we're actually going to then try to send out different types of things. And what happened is that when they added just a simple one with the benefit, they increased enrollment and adoption by 8%, just focusing on the key benefit and simplifying the whole message. So this is, again, free money, and it's very tough to think about a better benefit than free money. And not only just free money, it's about $204 on average per household for SNAP. So this is non-trivial free money. And yet we're seeing basically when you take away barriers to action, we can actually increase adoption, probably even more than increasing the payment. So this is also found with, if you want to pay people, it's interesting, that first chart that I showed, it was like low payment or high payment. If you extend it up and put it even higher payment, you get a much, much smaller jump. Because actually just adding on some incentives doesn't actually increase or decrease the benefit or the barrier to doing something. So at the point where we've done an incentive, we want to say, have we really addressed the barrier? And if you need to get more, we want to look at the key barriers to action. Okay. So I think we're going to end here, which is basically this idea that marketing is a confounded problem. Every time you're getting somebody to do something, you want to ask yourself, is it actually a preference of theirs to do it, or is there something else going on? And you kind of want to take a little bit of a magnifying glass and say, what actually motivates people? And we typically have a very strong point of view that, on the things that we've already done motivate people, or money motivates people. And I think the question that behavioral science always brings is that actually true, or is there something else going on? Perhaps there's another barrier, or perhaps there's like lack of meaning, or no effort that goes into it, or people just don't feel acknowledged. So on that, I think we're going to eat. Okay. Yeah, acknowledge.
Thanks, Kristen.
Do you want this? Oh, no.
I think you just said it right there.
I'll just take it.
Just take it. Just put it in your pocket. We are going to eat, but thank you so much to Kristen. This is fascinating stuff, and there's a lot to unpack here that I hope we'll be able to unpack together over the next couple of days and in subsequent conversations. But the thing that strikes me the most about what Kristen said is that what I find is that we as marketers, I think we're used to living in a reality where only 11% of people trust us. We're used to living in a reality where we have to incentivize and, dare I say, even bribe people to do things that we want them to do. But all the brands in this room make products that the experts who are part of Experticity's network are passionate about. They're products that unlock experiences that these people absolutely love. Never underestimate the power of your brand and access to your brand for these experts. It never ceases to amaze me, the kinds of very simple things we can do to unlock just a little bit more behind the scenes access for an expert, and they just eat that stuff up. Because as a recent research summary in The Economist talked about, there are few things as gratifying to people in this space as being recognized by the objects of their affection. So if you're really into whatever category it is that your brand makes products for, and the brand that makes the products you love comes to you and says, hey, like, you're special, you're passionate, you're knowledgeable, people trust you, we want to acknowledge that, and if we can figure out a way of fitting those rewards and that recognition into the three things that Kristen talked about, I think we'll find there's a lot more headroom for the types of expert experiences we unlock that translate into more recommendations for your brand, more consumption of your products by the people who influence consumers, etc. All right, lunch now. Lunch is right out here on the patio. It's going to be an hour, so we'll be back here at 1:15 for a panel on the Reebok float ride launch, which I assure you is going to be incredibly fascinating. There's been a ton of press written up on it lately, and we'll get a behind-the-scenes peek with the team who put it together. So enjoy lunch.